So last time, today we'll continue with where we left off last time, okay? Last time we talked about two main things, right? We talked about first complex sentences, right? We know that a simple sentence consists of a noun phrase and a verb phrase, right? We know that. But in every language that we know, we have ways to make sentences more complex by principally embedding another S within one major S, right? When you have the case of embedding, you always have one main clause, right? You always have the main clause, and you always have other subordinate clauses, right? So that's the case of embedding, right? And when you do embedding, you need what we call a complementizer, right? A complementizer is a word that joins, right? A word that joins the main clause and the subordinate clause together, right? In English, you have things like the word that, the word if, the word whether, right? So you need a complementizer word, and we do that by using a CP, right? A CP consists of a C, which is a complementizer, like that, which, or that, whether, or if, like that, right? And the other branch is an S, right? S goes to NP and VP, just like normal. Like that, okay? For example, I wonder that, I wonder if, like that. She asks if they will be, and so on, right? So in this case, the C, the complementizer, joins one main clause and one subordinate clause, okay? And the CP is hooked up with the VP, right? So that's what we talked about last time. And we also talked about coordinated structures, where you join two syntactic structures of the same type, of the same category. If you join an NP, you have to join that NP with another NP using a conjunction like and, or, but, and so on, okay? So for coordinated structure, you have, let's say you join two XPs together using a conjunction like this, okay? So it could be any type of phrase. Could be an NP, could be a VP, could be a word, and so on, okay? And then we also looked at ambiguity, right? Ambiguity is a case where you can interpret a sentence in two ways because your brain kind of processes the structure in two ways, right? So, and this is where we left off from last time, okay? So we'll continue, we'll pick up on ambiguity this time, and we'll just keep looking at different cases of ambiguity, okay? So we didn't finish the handout from last time, so let's look at that handout that we didn't finish. So it should be this one. And then the last thing that we did was on the second page, right? Here. We did consider those problems, right, last time. So we have some more sentences to account for. I have only 2 copies. Does anyone need one? Very valuable. So we already did 4.3. So let's look at 4.4, okay? First, we have to think about what 2 interpretations we can get from this, right? So 4.4. The protesters demanded more specific answer. So what might be 2 interpretations here? What might be the 2 readings that we can get out of this sentence here? Can you guess? Where's the problem that gives rise to 2 interpretations? They demanded more specific answers. So what could be the two readings? You see the word more? This is where the problem is. So more could be a determiner, right? Can I have more rice, for example, right? Can I have more rice? So in this case, in one reading, we can say the protesters demanded more specific answers, right? So just like, can I have more rice, like that? Okay, so that's one reading. So more is the determiner of specific answers, okay? Or more is the determiner of answers, in other words, and specific is an adjective phrase, right? So that's one reading. The second reading is demanded more specific answers, like that, right? In the second reading, more and specific go together, like that. Okay, so there are two readings. So in reading one, where you have, let's see, let me say, more of the specific answers. Okay, so that's reading one. More of the specific answers. They want more of the specific answers. Okay, in this case, we agree that more is a determiner of answers, right? So we can write the tree this way for that interpretation. So I'm lazy to write out everything here, so I just use the triangle. Okay, so I just say the protesters here, instead of breaking it down to determiner and end and so on. Okay, I'll just use this triangle to say that it can be broken down further. Okay, and then the VP consists of a V, demanded, and then NP. We have a determiner, which is more, and then adjective phrase, which is specific, right? And then N, answers, like that. So you can see that in this tree, more and the adjective phrase and then N, they stand at the same level, okay? Because they are under the same NP node, right? So everything works together, okay? Because they stand on the same level on the tree, okay? So more is a determiner of answers, like that, of the head noun answer, okay? So that's one interpretation. The second interpretation that we agree on is that they want answers that are more specific, right? They want answers that are more specific, okay? So this is the second reading. So the second reading is they want answers that are more specific. Okay? So in this case, the answers are not specific enough. Okay? But in the first case, in the first interpretation, the answers are already specific, but they want more of those things. Okay? So in the second case, you have more as the you call a degree word for specific, right? So in this case, everything is the same, so I'll just write out the VP. Okay? So the VP would go to the V, demanded, and then the NP will consist of two things. We'll have adjective phrase, AP, which consists of a degree word, which is more, and then the adjective itself, specific, and then the N, which is answers, like that. So this is the second case. And in this second case, you can see that more and specific work together. Okay? And they both modify the word answer. Okay? Any questions? Questions? Are you done on this? Then let's move on to the first page. There's one more, let's see, ambiguous sentence that we didn't take care of, which is number 2, 4.2. 4.2 is enough rest and exercise will help you recover. Enough rest and exercise will help you recover. So what are the two readings here? This is similar to the case that we looked at before, almost similar, okay? This is where the problem is, right? Enough. Because on one hand, you can say that enough works only with rest. So enough rest and exercise. I don't know how much exercise you should do, but you must have enough rest. But you have to do exercise also. It will help you recover both. So that's one interpretation. The second interpretation is enough rest and enough exercise, right? So both have to be done in the adequate amount, like that. So there are two interpretations, okay? So let's take care of the first interpretation where you just have enough modifying rest. Okay? So in this case, you just have enough rest and then exercise, two conjoined NPs, right? So this is how we do it. So the first interpretation, right? The first interpretation is exercise, just exercise, okay? Exercise plus enough rest. So that's the first interpretation. So exercise is by itself, right? And then enough goes with rest. So in that case, S goes to NP and VP, like that. And then we have two conjoined noun phrases, right? So NP1 and NP2, like that. The NP1 is enough rest, right? So we have adjective phrase and then adjective enough and then N, which is rest, like that. And then NP2 is exercise and exercise. Okay. For the VP, what is it? Will help you recover. So you have will as the ox, help as the V, and then U as the NP, and then recover. Okay. We'll talk about that type of clause today. So for now, you can just use the triangle will help you recover. Just a shorthand. So that's the first case where you have enough working only with rest, okay? Just here, but not the exercise, okay? So let's move on to the second case. So the second case is where you have enough modifying both rest and exercise. So it would be like this. So enough rest plus enough exercise. Okay? So S will go to NP and VP like that. And then enough has to modify both, right? So we have adjective phrase here, adjective enough, like that. And then you have NP1 and then and NP2 like that. And then this is enough rest and in exercise. Okay. So when we have everything on the same level like this, it means that they all work together. So you can see that the adjective here modifies everything in the same level. Okay? Okay, so far so good. Now let's switch gears to complementizer phrases. Okay, remember the case of embedding. When you have a complex sentence, you have to embed a subordinate clause in the main clause. Okay, so we can look at some examples on page 2 again. Like number 5. Number 5 is a case of embedding, right? We have David doesn't believe that Mary saw a UFO. So the complementizer is here. The complementizer is the word that, right? And then we have another clause in there, Mary saw a UFO. So you have two S's. One is within the bigger one, right? So this one is easy. So you can just do S, right? S, the main clause, goes to, again, NP and VP. And then in the main clause, you have the noun David, like that. And then the main verb is believe, right? So you have ox, doesn't, and then the V being believe. So this is the main clause, okay? Oh. Now we have to account for, or we have to work on the subordinate clause, which is that Mary saw a UFO. That particular clause is a subordinate clause. The head word is this complementizer, right? So we have a CP, right? Normally, if you have just one simple clause, you would have something like David doesn't believe it, David doesn't believe her, David doesn't believe her story, like that. But in this case, it's just not an NP anymore. It's a CP, which is the same as NP, but it's just more complex. So the CP consists of a C, which is the word that, right? And then you have a clause in it, S, which goes again to NP and VP, Mary, and then saw a UFO. So I'll just use the triangle here because I trust that you can draw that. V, saw, UFO, NP, like that. Okay? So far so good? If so, can you try your hands on number 6 and 7? For those of you who have not done those at home, number 6 and 7. Okay, number 6 and 7 also contain, each contain one subordinate clause. So you must have a CP like this, okay, within the main clause. So the first step maybe you just have to find where that CP is, where that complementizer phrase is, okay, by looking at the signaling word, right? The signaling word could be that, whether, or if, like that, okay? And then for the purpose of purposes of this type, you can just use the triangle to represent things that you don't want to focus on, like the VP or the NP. So we have she, which is a pronoun, right? And then inform, which is the main verb. And then her mother, which is an NP, right? Dead, and then N, like that. And then a CP is here, with the C, that being the complementizer. And then she hasn't changed the plan, like that. Okay? So hasn't is an ox, right? Ox, and then changes the V, like that. Okay? Now for the number 7, I think, or number 8, this is what it looks like. Whether she comes is unimportant to me, right? Number 7. So we have, instead of just an NP, we have a CP instead, okay? A CP is comparable to an NP, right? It's the same as an NP, but it's just more complex than an NP. So we have whether as the C, and then she as the pronoun here, and then comes as the main verb, as the verb in that subordinate clause. So the CP functions as the subject of the whole thing. Okay, and then the VP isn't important to me. So now we'll go on, okay? We'll go on further into something that's difficult. Now you know embedded clauses, you know coordinated clauses. Now we'll look at the PowerPoint slides that I sent out yesterday. And we'll just go into this, which is a kind of a difficult topic because you will not see on the page because it's silent syntax. Silent is something that you don't see, something that is not present, but is there. It's assumed to be there, okay? So silent syntax, this is in chapter 8 in your book on page 260, okay? It's, I think, the most difficult thing in this chapter. But I will go slow. So the goals for this topic, silent syntax, are to introduce what we call covert elements in syntax. Covert, there are two words, okay? Overt and covert. Covert is like covered, is like not present, is gone, you don't see. Covert is covered, something that you don't see. But if we take out the C, we have overt, which is obvious. Overt is obvious, something that you see. But covert is something that you don't see. Okay? So we'll introduce covert elements in syntax, things that you don't see. Okay? Because you don't see, that's difficult, right? Two elements that we'll study are pro, P-R-O, pro. Okay? And trace, two things, two names, pro and trace. I'll explain what they are. And then I'll have to provide arguments in support of covert elements. Because we don't see, we can only assume that they are there, right? But then there must be some evidence that points to their existence. So I'll provide arguments in support of those things, okay? Now, silent syntax or empty categories, I will use the two terms interchangeably. Silent syntax is covert elements, same thing as empty categories, okay? So categories that you don't see, okay? So far we have assumed that syntactic structure consists of overt constituents. So things that we can see, right? Word, phrases, and clauses which have overt phonetic form, meaning things that we can see, things that we hear, people pronounce, right? But there are also what we call silent constituents or empty categories too. And we'll just introduce two kinds of empty categories in this class, the pro and the trace. So two kinds, okay? Just before we introduce the pro and the trace, I have some sentences here. You can do it, and this is what we say in everyday life, right? You can do it, I know you can, right? So in this case, you see that something, the word do, actually do it, is deleted, right, from the second clause. They can do it, I know you can do it, right? So do it is gone, is deleted. But it's supposed to be there, right? So this is one idea of emptiness, right? Because it can be there, but it's deleted somehow, right? Notice that you cannot say, you can do it, I know you are, or I know you have. You cannot say that. You can only say can. Can is a copy of that modal here from the first clause. Same thing with number two. They will come. I know they will. Like that. So you can only have will here. Not I know they were, I know they do. Not that. Okay? So in this case, you can have only a copy of the modal in the first clause. And what is deleted, what can be there, is the word come or the phrase do it, the VP do it. Okay? So it's empty in that sense. Empty in the sense of not present here, but can be there. Okay? And in the third one, he was laughing and she crying. We can say this, or we can write this down. He was laughing and she crying. Okay? Now, the idea is just like 1 and 2. You can have a copy of the ox here, which is she was crying, right? The idea is just like 1 and 2, where you can have only a copy of the same thing, right? But you don't see it because it's deleted, but it can be there. So that's the idea of emptiness, okay? So on the tree, when we draw this, we can just have a branch for ox and then put a 0 in there, okay? Because it's gone, but it can be there. So the structure is on the tree, but it's just unfilled. We'll call that unfilled, or filled by a 0, okay? So that's the idea of emptiness. Something that can be there, something that can theoretically be there, but is deleted. That's one idea of emptiness, okay? Now, this is another idea of emptiness. So small clauses. A small clause is a construction that has the subject predicate characteristics of a clause, meaning that a small clause has the same kind of characteristics as the NP and the VP under S. In other words, you have the subject, you have the VP predicate, right? But a small clause lacks the tense of a finite clause. So, in other words, the tense is gone or the verb is gone. Okay? Let me show you some examples. This one, which is a fact. Everyone considers Chris Da the best professor at Hanyang. Okay? Here, this is not a small clause. No, that one is a small clause. Okay? If you compare that to a full clause, main clause with a subordinate clause, like everyone considers that Chris Da is the best professor at Hanyang. Here, you have a CP, right? That is a C, and then Chris Da is the best professor. Here is an S consisting of NP and VP, right? But you can also write it out like this. Everyone consider Chris Da the best professor at Hanyang. Here, the difference is that there is no complementizer that you can see. It's gone. The word that is gone. And the word is gone, right? But the two sentences here have an exact same meaning. So in this case, we can say that Chris Da, the best professor at Hanyang, is a small clause. It's small because it lacks the complementizer that you can see, and it lacks the verb is that you can see. Okay? So that's the idea of empty category or silent syntax. It's gone from your sight, but it can be there. So that's the idea of empty categories. Same thing with the police want the criminal dead. Okay, the criminal to be dead. The criminal is dead, like that. Or the janitor wiped the floor clean. It's like the floor is clean. So the verb is gone, and also gone is the complementizer. Okay. So that's the idea of silent syntax again, which is the fact that you have a clause without a tense verb, without a verb. Okay, but it still has the same kind of characteristic of an NP and a VP. So that's what I already explained. Now, what I want to do is to draw some trees. Okay, for this one everyone considers, and then the police, and then the janitor. So can you draw out the tree for the full version first? Can you draw out everyone considers that Chris Da is the best professor at Hanyang? Can you try your hands on that? And then we'll compare the answer. And then we'll just do the small clause ones. Okay? So I'll do it here. So S goes to NP. So this is what it should look like, right? So we have everyone as a pronoun here, considers as the main verb, and then a complementizer phrase consisting of the complementizer that, and then another s. This is the embedded class, right? Embedded case, okay? So this is what you should already be familiar with, right? Now, what we'll do is we'll do the small clause version, right? The small clause version is something that looks like the real embedded case, but it lacks the verb and it lacks the C, okay? So for the small clause version, what we'll do is, I'll just make an adjustment here. What we'll do for the small clause version is we'll just leave that, okay? And we'll just put in a 0. And then we'll just leave that and we'll just put in the 0. So everything is the same. It's just that the small clause version lacks the complementizer and it lacks the V. So we put in the 0. So it will read, everyone considers Krishna the best professor, like same thing, right? But it still has the same structure here. So the difference is the missing complementizer and V, the missing V. But everything is the same, okay? So far, so good. Now, what about the rest of the examples here? The police want the criminal dead, and the janitor wiped the floor clean. Can you do the same thing? Okay? Because what I underline here is a clause, right? It's a small clause. So a small clause must be a CP, and this must be a CP too. The floor clean is a CP. It's just that the C is unfilled and the V is unfilled, like that, okay? So I'll try my hands at both, and then I'll show you in a minute here. So it's gonna be the police, NP, the police, and then VP, the V want, and then CP, C, S. Like this. Right? So it's got to be like the police want, right? And then the criminal, and then dead is the adjective, like that. With the C unfilled and with the V unfilled. So this is what we call silent syntax, okay? Silent because it's there. Theoretically speaking, it's there, but it's just not pronounced. It's just unfilled. The last one, the janitor wiped the floor clean. Exact same thing that you see here. So it's gonna be this one, right? So the janitor is the main NP, wiped here, and then with the CP here, and then the C is unfilled with a 0, and then the verb is unfilled. So the floor is clean, like that. So what we talked about as small clause is this part, right? Small clause, because it doesn't have a V. So this is an example of what we call silent syntax. Okay. So one thing that you learn from this is that whenever you see a small clause, it should have the structure of a clause, which is an S. Okay, even though it misses, it's missing one V, it's still a clause. Okay, and it's a subordinate clause which is embedded in the main clause here. Okay, so far so good. So let's move on. Here. And I have two more examples, same thing. But in this case, you have a verb, okay? But the verb doesn't have any tense. In other words, I can hear them arrive. So this is a small clause with them as the subject of arrive. Even though it is in the object form, right? They and them. But it's the subject of arrive. Who arrived is them, right? So it's the subject of arrive. So in this case, you have the verb, but the verb doesn't have a tense, okay? But it's still a small clause. Or everyone believes Krista to be smart. Here, to be is what we call an infinitive, right? So you don't have any tense there. But the structure is still the same. The V is here, and then this is a CP with C unfilled, and then them as a NP subject, right? And arrive as the VP. Okay? So the idea is the same as the small clauses that we saw earlier. Okay? Same structure. Okay? Now, let's look at pro. Pro here is like pronoun, okay? It's like pronoun. Now, if you compare here, 1 and 2, we want you to stay, and we want to stay, okay? In the first one, we want you to stay. You already know that this is a small clause, right? With you here as the subject of to stay, that's a small clause. So it's a CP there, right? CP within we want, okay? Now, in the second one, we want to stay. You don't have the word you here, right? But we would suppose that there is a pronoun there, even though we don't see it. So we'll just suppose that there's something there, just like there's the word you there. So we'll call this thing a pro. So we'll have pro here, okay? Again, the reason is we have to be uniform in our theory, right? Because there can be the word you here. So the structure must already be there, but it's unfilled. So we call that the element, the silent element, or the empty element, which is a pro. We call that a pro, okay? So a pro is here, okay? Even though we don't see it. The same for these two sentences. The president hopes to be re-elected. The president hopes that he will be re-elected. So in the second one is the full version, right, of a CP. So you have a complementizer, an NP he, and then the tense verb, right, will be re-elected. So that's what we have normally. But in number one, it's a small clause. hopes to be re-elected. This is a small clause, right? But a small clause, this one, must have a subject, right? Who will be re-elected, right? So it has to be he, but it's not present. So we call it an empty category. And we give it a name, pro. Hopes himself to be re-elected. So we give it a name as pro, right? So there is a pronoun here, pro, which is empty, but it can be there. So it's the subject of re-elected, okay? So that's my argument, that 1 and 2 have the same meaning. And the number 2 is the fuller version of number 1. So we must suppose that, we must believe that there's a pro here, right? Which is the subject of re-elected, okay? And then another argument in support of the existence of pro is that if you look at these two examples, they want their son to become a millionaire. That's good. But you cannot say they want their son to become millionaires. You cannot have the S here. So this means that the word millionaire has to agree with the number of son. Son is singular, so millionaire has to be a singular word too. So you can see that son is the subject of a millionaire here. Okay? In the second one, they want to become millionaires. In this case, you don't have a pronoun or you don't have a noun here, but it has to be the plural version, right? Why? Because there must be a pro here, and that pro must be plural in number, which agrees with the word they, because it's they that want to become millionaires, like that. So these are arguments in support of the silent thing, the empty thing that we call pro. So there must be something here, because if there was no pro, then why must this be plural, right? So it must have agree in terms of number with this pro and with the word they, okay? Okay, so we'll do the pro here. So let's draw a tree for this one. Can you try your hands on this one? They want to become millionaires. So this has to be a CP, right? Because it's a small clause. But that CP has no complementizer, and the subject is pro, right? So I'll show you in a minute. Let me do that here. So they want, so NP, VP, they, and then we want, this. Like this, right? So they want, and then we don't have anything under the C because there's no overt complementizer. And then we have pro, which is some kind of empty pronoun that can be there. Like they want themselves, like that, to become, and then millionaires, like that. Okay? So the verb here is missing a tense. It's just an infinitive with to become, and then the NP is millionaires, like that. Okay? Again, the idea is that you must have a small clause here, what we call a small clause, right? Small clause is a clause that is just like a regular clause, but it lacks a tense verb. Okay? Okay, so far so good. Can you do number 1 and number 2 for today? Number 1, to walk around Toksugung is Songmin's favorite pastime. First, you have to notice where the small clause is, right? So the small clause is a clause that lacks a tense verb, right? So in this case, the small clause is in the front, right? So the CP is in the front. To walk around Toksugung, right? So that's where the small clause is. And then the rest is the main clause, okay? So that's going to be your CP. And number 2, the professor expected the student to come to class on time. In this one, the small clause starts out with the students, right? The student to come to class on time. That's the small clause, okay? So I'll give you 5 minutes, and then I'll work on this too. For the first one, to walk around Toksugung is Songmin's favorite pastime. Pastime is hobby, right? Here, this is where the small clause is, right? So it's a CP with the C and the NP unfilled because we don't know where the subject, what the subject is. And then to walk is a verb that doesn't have any tense. It's an infinitive, right? And then around Toksugung is your PP, prepositional phrase. Now, you might ask me, so are there any cases where we have the C and the NP filled? There are. For example, you can have something like for him to walk around Toksugung. So for, it can be here, and then for him, right? Because it's he that walks around, right? So you can have cases like where you have the C filled and the NP filled. For me to walk around Toksugung, for him, for her, for whoever, okay? So if you have the word for, it could be a complementizer, okay? Because it introduces the small clause, right? And then this thing, if you want to go down further, this is a determiner, right? Because there's the apostrophe S there. Just like the word his or her or your, like that, okay? Determiner of the noun past time, okay? So far so good. The other one is here. So we have the professor as the NP, the professor as the NP, and then expected as the main verb, and then you have this small clause. Because it comes from the professor expected that the student, and so on, okay? There could be the word that here, but it's just not there. So this is empty. And then the tense is gone. We have just only to come, okay? So I guess what I introduced today is the concept of the small clause, right? And in the small clause, your C, your complementizer, may be unfilled, okay? Could be a 0, and the V could be missing, or the V could be an infinitive verb, okay? Without any tense. And I also introduced the word pro, right? Pro is a pronoun that is not there. So pro can be here because it's the subject of the verb, okay? Pro is just like a pronoun, okay? And a pronoun, the place of a pronoun is always here, right? Which is the subject of the verb, okay? So we'll stop here for today, and then we'll come back and look at trace on Wednesday. And I will give you an answer key to the homework that you will submit today. And this is for our quiz on Wednesday, right? So you need to be able to write some rules, kind of phonological rules. And you need to be able to predict some allophones in English, including the ED. Remember the ED sound, the S and the Z plural, remember? And syllable structure, and also some basic morphemes that we discussed in class.